At the height of his despair, the millionaire watched his empire crumble in front of silent advisors and hopeless faces. "Sir, I know how to save your company," cried a little gypsy and fortune-teller girl, her voice cutting through the air like a bolt of lightning. In a frozen instant, all eyes turned to that little girl with eyes burning with certainty. What she revealed shocked everyone. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel, don't forget to like this video, and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The imposing glass and steel structure of Maxwell Industries pierced the autumn sky like a monument to success, but within its walls, a different story was unfolding. Alexander Maxwell sat at the head of the mahogany conference table, his fingers drumming an irregular rhythm against its polished surface. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the faces of his assembled board members and advisors. "The numbers don't lie, Mr. Maxwell," Thomas Henderson, his chief financial advisor, stated flatly. The stack of reports before him might as well have been a tombstone for everything Alexander had built over the past 20 years. "Our creditors are demanding immediate payment, and our cash reserves," Henderson's voice trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. Alexander's steel-gray eyes swept across the room, taking in the downcast gazes and nervous fidgeting of his most trusted team members. These were the same people who had celebrated countless victories with him, who had raised champagne toasts to their seemingly unstoppable success. Now they couldn't even meet his gaze. "There must be something we're missing," Alexander insisted, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded respect in countless negotiations. But today, that authority seemed to fall flat against the weight of reality pressing down on them all. Sarah Chen, his head of legal affairs, cleared her throat. "Mr. Maxwell, we've explored every possible avenue. The regulatory changes have hit us harder than anyone could have predicted, and with the market downturn." She shuffled through her papers, though everyone knew she didn't need to reference them. The dire situation was etched into all their minds. Outside the conference room, Lisa Parker, his secretary of 15 years, hovered uncertainly. Through the glass walls, Alexander could see her conflicted expression. She had another stack of urgent messages, but she knew better than to interrupt this crucial meeting. Running his hands through his silver-streaked dark hair, Alexander stood abruptly, causing several board members to flinch. "I want every transaction from the past 5 years reviewed, every contract, every investment, every single decimal point. There has to be a solution." "Sir," Henderson ventured, "that would require tremendous resources we simply don't have anymore. And time. Time is not on our side." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Alexander turned to face the window, his reflection superimposed over the city skyline he had helped shape. In the distance, he could see the construction site of what was supposed to be Maxwell Industries' new tech center, now just another dream, teetering on the edge of reality. "Leave me," he commanded, his voice barely above a whisper. One by one, his advisors gathered their materials and filed out, their expensive shoes silent against the plush carpeting. Only Lisa remained, hesitating at the doorway. "Your daughter called again," she said softly. "She's worried about you." Alexander's jaw tightened. Emma, his only child, had been trying to reach him for days, but he couldn't bear to face her. How could he tell her that the legacy he had promised to pass on to her was crumbling? "Tell her I'll call her back," he replied, knowing he wouldn't, not today, not until he found a way out of this mess. As the day wore on, Alexander remained in his office, poring over reports and financial statements until the numbers began to blur together. The city lights came alive outside his window, twinkling like stars that seemed to mock his predicament. His empire was slipping through his fingers like sand, and for the first time in his life, Alexander Maxwell felt truly powerless. Just as he was about to call it a night, Lisa's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Maxwell, there's someone here to see you. She says it's urgent." "No more meetings today," he snapped, his patience worn thin. "Sir, it's different. She's quite insistent, and..." Lisa's voice held a note of uncertainty he'd never heard before. Before he could respond, his office door burst open. What he saw next would change everything, though not in any way he could have possibly imagined. Standing in his doorway was a sight so incongruous with the corporate setting that Alexander briefly wondered if exhaustion had finally overtaken his senses. A small girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old, stood confidently before him. Her dark hair was intricately braided with colorful ribbons, and her dress was a whirlwind of patterns that seemed to dance in the office's fluorescent lighting. But it was her eyes that captured his attention, deep, knowing eyes that seemed to hold centuries of wisdom. "You need to listen," the girl announced, her voice clear and unwavering. "Your empire isn't falling. It's being pushed." Lisa appeared behind her, flustered and apologetic. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Maxwell. She just ran past security. I'll call them right away." "Wait," Alexander found himself saying, though he couldn't explain why. Something in the girl's steady gaze held him transfixed. "Let her speak." The girl approached his desk with the grace of a much older soul. From her pocket, she pulled out an intricately embroidered handkerchief, its patterns reminiscent of ancient symbols and flowing lines. She spread it carefully on his desk, right over the financial reports that had been tormenting him all day. "My grandmother taught me to read the lines that connect people's destinies," she said, her small finger tracing one of the embroidered patterns. "Your lines are tangled because someone close to you has been weaving darkness into your story." Alexander should have dismissed this as nonsense. He was a man of numbers and concrete facts, not mystical proclamations from strange children. Yet something in her words resonated with a suspicion that had been gnawing at the edges of his consciousness. "Who are you?" he asked, leaning forward in his chair. "How did you get in here?" "I'm Isabella," she replied simply. "My mother used to work for you. Angela Martinez. She tried to warn you once, but no one would listen." The name hit Alexander like a physical blow. Angela Martinez, his former accounting manager, who had been dismissed 3 years ago after raising allegations of financial irregularities. Allegations that had been quickly dismissed by his trusted assistant, James Porter. "That's impossible," he muttered, but even as he spoke, pieces began shifting in his mind like a kaleidoscope, forming a new pattern. Isabella's hand moved to another part of the handkerchief, where the threads formed a complex spiral. "The poison in your company comes from someone who sits at your right hand, someone who breaks bread with you, while feeding your secrets to your enemies." A chill ran down Alexander's spine as he remembered all the times James had insisted on handling sensitive negotiations alone, the mysterious losses that had been explained away with market fluctuations, the competitors who always seemed one step ahead of their strategies. "Your assistant," Isabella continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He makes phone calls every Tuesday night to a number that belongs to your biggest competitor, and sometimes he meets with a woman in a red car, a woman who used to share your last name." Alexander's breath caught in his throat. Victoria, his ex-wife, now married to Richard Harrison, CEO of Harrison Enterprises, their biggest rival. How could this child know about any of this? "I see things others don't," Isabella explained, as if reading his thoughts. "My grandmother says it's a gift passed down through our blood, but you don't need magic to find the truth. You just need to look in the right places." She reached into her other pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, placing it carefully beside the handkerchief. "These are the numbers your mother noticed before they made her leave. The real numbers, not the ones they showed you." Alexander's hands trembled as he unfolded the paper. The handwriting was unmistakably Angela's, neat rows of figures and dates that told a story very different from the one in the official reports. "Why are you helping me?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. Isabella gathered her handkerchief, folding it with careful precision. "Because my grandmother says that when good people do nothing, darkness wins. And you're not a bad person, Mr. Maxwell. You just lost your way." She turned to leave but paused at the door. "Check the Tuesday night calls and watch the security footage from the parking garage last week. The red car comes every second Thursday at exactly 9 p.m. With that, she was gone, leaving Alexander alone with a piece of paper that might hold the key to saving everything he had built. But more importantly, she had given him something he had lost in recent weeks: hope. As the night deepened outside, his window, Alexander picked up his phone. His fingers hovered over the keypad for a moment before he dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Detective Morrison. It's Alexander Maxwell. I need your help with something discreet. Detective. Jack Morrison hadn't changed much in the 5 years since Alexander had last seen him. His weathered face and sharp eyes still carried the same intensity, though a few more grey hairs had joined his temples. They sat in a quiet corner of a small cafe 3 blocks from Maxwell Industries, away from the prying eyes. That seemed to follow Alexander everywhere these days. Let me get this straight, Morrison said, stirring his black coffee thoughtfully. You're investigating your own company based on information from a child, a mysterious girl who somehow breached your security. His skepticism was evident, but there was also curiosity in his voice. Alexander placed Angela Martinez's numbers on the table between them. Look at these figures, Jack, really look at them. Someone has been cooking our books for years and I was too blind to see it. Morrison studied the paper, his trained eye catching patterns that others might miss. These transaction dates, and they all coincide with your quarterly reports. Someone was manipulating the numbers just enough to stay under the radar. Exactly. Alexander leaned forward, lowering his voice. And according to the girl, this goes deeper than just financial fraud. She mentioned my ex-wife, Victoria, and regular meetings with my assistant, James Porter. The detective's eyebrows rose. Victoria? The same Victoria who's now married to Richard Harrison? He whistled low. That's quite a connection. But Alex, you need more than a child's story to pursue this. That's why I called you, Alexander replied, sliding a USB drive across the table. I need you to analyze our security footage, especially the parking garage on Thursday nights, and I need you to trace some phone calls every Tuesday night from James Porter's office line. Morrison pocketed the drive. This is going to take time, and it won't be cheap. Time is something I don't have much of, Alexander admitted, but money, well, what's left of it is yours if you can help me uncover the truth. As they discussed the details, Alexander's phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. His heart nearly stopped when he read it. James is asking questions about your schedule. He knows you're not in the office. We need to move fast, Alexander showed Morrison the message. If James suspects I'm investigating him, he might accelerate whatever he's planning, Morrison finished the thought. I'll start right away. But Alex, you need to act normal. Don't let anyone know you suspect something's wrong. Back at the office, Alexander found James waiting in his office, a concerned expression perfectly crafted on his face. Sir, I was worried when I couldn't find you this morning. The board is expecting updates on our crisis management plan. Alexander forced a smile, remembering Isabella's words about the snake at his table. Just needed some fresh air to think. James, actually, I could use your help. Could you pull all our financial records from the past 5 years? I want to review everything personally. A flicker of something. Was it worry? Crossed James's face before his professional mask slipped back into place. Of course, sir, though I'm not sure what good that will do at this point. Sometimes looking back is the only way to move forward, Alexander replied, watching his assistant carefully. Oh, and James, include all the correspondence with Harrison Enterprises as well, every interaction we've had with them. James's hand twitched almost imperceptibly. That's a lot of documentation, sir. It might take some time to compile. Take all the time you need, Alexander said smoothly. It's not like we're going anywhere. After James left, Alexander sat back in his chair, his mind racing. He needed to find Angela Martinez, Isabella's mother. If what the girl said was true, Angela had tried to warn him years ago. He owed her an apology, and more importantly, he needed her expertise. A soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Lisa entered, carrying a small package wrapped in colorful fabric. This was left at reception for you, she said, placing it on his desk. Alexander carefully unwrapped it to find another embroidered handkerchief, different from the one Isabella had shown him. This one had a pattern that seemed to form a map, with golden threads intersecting at various points. A small note fell out. The truth leaves traces like footprints in snow. Follow the golden threads. They will show you where the money goes. My grandmother says when you look for light, even the smallest spark can illuminate the darkest corner. P.S. My mother works at the library now. She likes to read during her lunch break in the rose garden. Alexander held the handkerchief up to the light, studying the intricate pattern. The golden threads seemed to connect various points in a way that reminded him of transaction flows. Could these points represent the path of the missing money? His computer pinged with an email from Morrison. Found something interesting in Tuesday night phone records. Meeting tonight, same cafe, 8 p.m., come alone. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across his office, Alexander realized he was no longer just fighting to save his company. He was unraveling a conspiracy that had been years in the making. And somehow, a little girl with ancient wisdom in her eyes had set it all in motion. He looked out at the city skyline, remembering Isabella's words about darkness and light. Tomorrow, he would visit the library's rose garden during lunch hour. But tonight, he had a meeting that might finally begin to illuminate the truth that had been hidden in plain sight all along. The library's rose garden was a hidden oasis in the heart of the city, its carefully tended blooms offering a stark contrast to the concrete and glass surrounding it. Alexander arrived just as the lunch hour began, his heart pounding with anticipation. He hadn't seen Angela Martinez since that fateful day 3 years ago when security had escorted her from the building. He found her exactly where Isabella said she would be, sitting on a bench with a book in her lap. She looked different from how he remembered, more serene despite everything that had happened. When she looked up and saw him, her expression remained remarkably composed. "I wondered how long it would take you to find your way here," she said, closing her book. "Isabella said you would come." Alexander sat beside her, the sweet fragrance of roses filling the space between them. "Angela, I owe you the biggest apology of my life. I should have listened to you 3 years ago." She smiled sadly. "Better late than never, I suppose. Though I have to admit, it took my daughter's special gift to make you see what was right in front of you all along." "Your daughter is remarkable," Alexander said carefully. "How does she know so much about what's happening at Maxwell Industries?" Angela's fingers traced the cover of her book, a volume about ancient trading routes, he noticed. "Isabella has always seen things others miss. My mother, her grandmother, says it's a gift passed down through generations of our family. We see the connections between people, events, money, like threads in a tapestry." "The handkerchiefs," Alexander murmured. "They're maps, aren't they?" "In a way," Angela nodded. "My mother embroiders them based on Isabella's visions. The patterns show the flow of energy, in this case, the flow of money and information through your company." Alexander pulled out the handkerchief he'd received yesterday, spreading it between them. "Can you help me understand what it shows?" Angela's fingers moved across the golden threads with practiced precision. "These intersecting points, they're shell companies. James Porter has been directing funds through them for years, using them to hide the money trail. But look here," she pointed to a particular knot in the pattern. "All the threads eventually lead to one place." "Harrison Enterprises," Alexander finished, the pieces finally falling into place. "They've been siphoning resources and information from Maxwell Industries all along." "Yes, but it's more than that." Angela's voice dropped to a whisper. "Your ex-wife Victoria isn't just married to Richard Harrison. She's the architect of this entire scheme. She's been planning this since before your divorce." The revelation hit Alexander like a physical blow. "How do you know this?" "Because I was her accountant before I was yours," Angela replied. "I saw the patterns starting to form back then, but I couldn't prove anything. When I finally gathered enough evidence at Maxwell Industries, James Porter made sure I was discredited before I could bring it to you." Just then, Alexander's phone vibrated with a message from Detective Morrison. "Security footage confirms regular meetings between Porter and a woman in a red Tesla. Have more info about the Tuesday night calls. Urgent." "I need to go," Alexander stood, but hesitated. "Angela, I want to make this right. Would you consider coming back to Maxwell Industries? We need your expertise now more than ever." She looked up at him, considering. "On one condition. You don't just clean house. You rebuild the foundation. Your company lost its way because it focused solely on profit. Isabella says there's a better path forward, one that balances success with purpose. Your daughter seems to have wisdom far beyond her years, Alexander smiled. I'm beginning to think she's exactly what Maxwell Industries needs right now. As he turned to leave, Angela called after him, Alexander, watch out for James today. Isabella says he's planning something desperate. The warning sent a chill down his spine as he hurried back to the office. What he didn't know was that James Porter was already in motion, setting in motion events that would force everything into the open sooner than anyone expected. In his haste, Alexander didn't notice the red Tesla parked across from the library, or the woman inside watching his interaction with Angela through tinted windows. Victoria Harrison lowered her designer sunglasses, a cold smile playing across her lips as she picked up her phone. He knows, she said simply. Move to phase 2. Alexander's return to Maxwell Industries was met with an unusual atmosphere of tension. The normally bustling corridors seemed eerily quiet, and staff members quickly averted their eyes as he passed. Something was definitely wrong. Lisa intercepted him before he could reach his office, her face pale with concern. Sir, the board has convened an emergency meeting. James Porter presented evidence this morning. Allegations about your leadership and financial decisions over the past year. What kind of allegations? Alexander asked, though he already suspected the answer. He's claiming you've been deliberately misleading investors, hiding losses and… Lisa lowered her voice. Engaging in insider trading with competitors. A bitter laugh escaped Alexander's lips. The irony was almost perfect. James was accusing him of the very crimes he himself had committed. When is this meeting? It's happening now, sir. 15th floor conference room. Alexander straightened his tie and headed for the elevator, his mind racing. This was James's desperate move, trying to discredit him before the truth could come out. As the elevator climbed, his phone buzzed with a text from Detective Morrison. Got everything you need. Where should I send it? Send it to Lisa Parker, he typed back quickly. Tell her to distribute it to all board members immediately. The conference room doors opened to reveal a scene that would have been comical if it weren't so serious. James Porter stood at the head of the table, Alexander's usual position, gesturing dramatically at a series of charts displayed on the screen behind him. As you can see, James was saying, these transactions clearly show a pattern of Mr. Maxwell. His confident demeanor faltered slightly as Alexander entered the room. We were just discussing some concerning discoveries about the company's financial situation. How fascinating, Alexander replied calmly, taking a seat at the far end of the table. Please, continue. I'm particularly interested in hearing about the Tuesday night phone calls. James's face went blank for a fraction of a second before he recovered. I'm not sure what you mean. Oh, I think you do. Alexander leaned forward. Just like I think you know exactly why our competitor always seems to be one step ahead of our strategies, and why certain financial records have been mysteriously altered over the past 3 years. The board members exchanged confused glances as James's professional facade began to crack. These are desperate accusations from a man who knows he's losing control of his company. I have documentation. Speaking of documentation, Alexander interrupted smoothly, I believe the board members have just received some very interesting files from my secretary. One by one, the board members checked their phones and tablets. The room filled with the sound of sharp intakes of breath and muttered exclamations as they reviewed Detective Morrison's evidence. Security footage of James's meetings with Victoria, phone records of his Tuesday night calls to Harrison Enterprises, and most damning of all, the complete trail of financial transactions that Angela Martinez had originally discovered. This is fabricated, James stammered, but his face had gone ashen. Is it? Alexander stood, commanding the room's attention. Just like the evidence you fabricated against Angela Martinez 3 years ago, or the altered financial reports you've been feeding me for years. You can't prove anything, James snarled, his composed demeanor completely evaporating. Actually, he can, a new voice joined the conversation. Angela Martinez stood in the doorway, holding a thick folder of documents. I kept copies of everything, every transaction, every altered report, every piece of correspondence. I knew someday the truth would need to come out. James lunged for the door, but security personnel were already there, summoned quietly by Lisa during the confrontation. As they escorted him out, he turned back with a venomous glare. Victoria will never let you win. She's already 10 steps ahead of you. No, James, Alexander replied quietly. For once, she's the one who's behind. After James was gone, Alexander addressed the stunned board members. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed today is just the surface. Our company hasn't been failing. It's been systematically undermined from within. But more importantly, this crisis has shown me that Maxwell Industries needs to change. Not just our security protocols or our financial oversight, but our fundamental approach to business. He gestured to Angela, who stepped forward. Ms. Martinez will be returning to her position with an expanded role in compliance and ethical oversight. Her first task will be conducting a complete audit of our operations, transparent, thorough, and honest. The board members nodded in approval, but Alexander wasn't finished. However, we're not just going to clean up this mess. We're going to rebuild Maxwell Industries into something better, something that measures success not just in profits, but in purpose. As the board meeting concluded, Alexander's phone buzzed with another message. This one was from an unknown number, but he recognized Isabella's way of writing immediately. The storm isn't over yet. The Queen makes her move at sunset. But remember, sometimes the best way to win is to change the game entirely. Alexander looked out the window at the afternoon sun. Victoria was still out there, and she wouldn't take this setback lightly. But for the first time in months, he felt truly confident about the path ahead. The game was indeed about to change, in ways that none of them could have predicted. The sunset painted the city skyline in shades of amber and gold as Alexander waited in his office. Isabella's warning about Victoria's move at sunset had him on edge, but he had learned to trust the girl's insights. Angela sat across from him, reviewing financial documents, while Detective Morrison paced near the window. She'll try to discredit you publicly, Angela said, looking up from her work. It's her signature move. When she can't win quietly, she creates a spectacle. Morrison nodded in agreement. My sources say she's called a press conference at Harrison Enterprises for 7 p.m. Something about exposing corporate corruption at the highest levels. Alexander checked his watch, 6:30 p.m. Let her try. We have the truth on our side this time. Truth isn't always enough in the corporate world, Angela replied softly. You know that better than anyone. Just then, Lisa burst into the office, her usual composure shattered. Sir, you need to see this. They're broadcasting live from Harrison Enterprises. Alexander turned on the office television, where Harrison stood at a podium, every inch the polished corporate powerhouse he remembered. Her red suit matched the color of her car, and her smile held the same cold confidence it had when she'd served him divorce papers years ago. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, Victoria began, her voice carrying the practiced sincerity that had once fooled him completely. Today I stand before you not as a competitor of Maxwell Industries, but as a concerned citizen. What I'm about to reveal will shake the very foundation of corporate trust in our city. Alexander's phone rang. It was Isabella. Don't let her finish that speech, the girl said urgently. The truth isn't in her words, it's in her hands. He squinted at the television screen, focusing on Victoria's hands as she gestured. There, glinting on her right wrist, was a distinctive golden bracelet, one he remembered purchasing for her on their 10th anniversary. That bracelet, he murmured, she never takes it off because it's not just jewelry, is it? It's a drive, Isabella confirmed. Everything she's ever stolen, every transaction, every secret, she keeps it all there, hidden in plain sight. She never trusted anyone else to keep her secrets. Alexander turned to Morrison. How fast can you get to Harrison Enterprises? 10 minutes, if I break some speed limits, the detective replied, already heading for the door. Take Angela with you, Alexander called after them. She'll know exactly what to look for. As they rushed out, Alexander returned his attention to the press conference. Victoria was building to her big reveal, producing documents that supposedly proved his corruption. But he noticed something else now. the slight tremor in her hands, the barely perceptible glance toward the exit. She knew she was exposed. "Ms. Harrison," a reporter's voice cut through her presentation, "can you explain these photos we just received?" The camera panned to a large screen behind Victoria, where images began to appear. Her meetings with James Porter, document after document showing the real money trail, and most damaging of all, emails between her and James plotting the systematic destruction of Maxwell Industries. Victoria's composure cracked. "These are clearly fabricated." "Are they?" Alexander's voice boomed through the conference room as he strode in, flanked by security personnel. "Just like the evidence you fabricated against me? Against Angela?" "Martinez!" The cameras swiveled to capture his entrance, and reporters began shouting questions. But Alexander's eyes were fixed on Victoria's bracelet. "That's an interesting piece of jewelry, Victoria. Mind if I take a closer look?" She took a step back, her hand instinctively covering the bracelet. "You have no right to be here." "Actually, he has every right," Richard Harrison's voice cut through the chaos. Victoria's current husband emerged from the crowd, his face a mask of cold fury. "Especially since I just learned how you've been manipulating both our companies." Victoria's eyes darted between them, calculating her options. But before she could move, Angela Martinez appeared beside her, smoothly removing the bracelet from her wrist. "I believe this contains some very interesting information that the SEC would love to see." As security personnel moved in, Alexander stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, you came here expecting a story about corruption. Well, you're going to get one, but not the story Victoria planned to tell. This is a story about how corporate greed nearly destroyed two companies and how we're going to make sure it never happens again." He proceeded to lay out his vision for the new Maxwell Industries, one built on transparency, ethical business practices, and genuine social responsibility. As he spoke, he could see Isabella and her grandmother standing at the back of the room, nodding in approval. The little girl held up another embroidered handkerchief, this one showing a pattern of intertwined circles rather than the sharp angles of the previous designs. Her message was clear: the cycle of deception was breaking, making way for something new to emerge. Later that evening, as the media frenzy began to die down, Alexander sat in his office with Angela, Isabella, and her grandmother. The old woman smiled as she spread a new handkerchief on his desk, its patterns showing a completely different kind of future, one where profit and purpose could coexist in harmony. The morning after Victoria's dramatic downfall, Maxwell Industries hummed with a new kind of energy. Employees whispered in corridors not about scandal and corruption, but about transformation and possibility. Alexander stood in the lobby, watching his team members arrive for what would be one of the most important days in the company's history. "They're ready for change," Isabella said, appearing beside him as if by magic. Today, her colorful dress was adorned with embroidered sunflowers, and her dark eyes sparkled with wisdom beyond her years. "But they need to understand the vision." Alexander smiled down at his young advisor. "That's why I've called an all-hands meeting. Every employee, from the board members to the maintenance staff. It's time to plant those seeds of change you keep talking about." The company's largest conference center was packed to capacity. Extra chairs had been brought in, and still, people lined the walls. Alexander took in the sea of faces, some anxious, some hopeful, all waiting to hear what would come next. "For years," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "Maxwell Industries has been focused solely on the bottom line. We measured success in profit margins and market share, but recent events have shown us the cost of that narrow vision." He gestured to Angela Martinez, who sat in the front row with Isabella and her grandmother. "We lost sight of our most valuable asset, our people. We ignored voices that tried to warn us, dismissed concerns that didn't fit our profit-driven narrative. That ends today." A murmur ran through the crowd as Alexander unveiled large screens showing the company's new organizational structure. "First, we're establishing an ethics and compliance division, headed by Angela Martinez. This division will have real power, direct access to the board, and complete oversight of all financial transactions." Angela stood, receiving a spontaneous round of applause that brought tears to her eyes. After all she'd been through, this moment of vindication meant everything. Second, Alexander continued, we're creating the Maxwell Foundation for Innovation and Social Impact. This foundation will be funded with 10% of our annual profits, focusing on education, community development, and supporting young innovators who want to make a difference in the world. He paused, his eyes finding Isabella in the crowd. Sometimes, the wisest insights come from unexpected sources. We need to learn to listen, not just to market trends and financial advisors, but to the voices that speak truth to power. The grandmother stood slowly, her weathered hands holding another of her intricate handkerchiefs. "May I?" she asked, her accent thick but her voice clear. Alexander nodded, helping her to the stage. She held up the handkerchief for all to see. Its patterns showed a tree with deep roots and spreading branches, all interconnected with golden threads. "In my culture," she explained, "we believe that success without purpose is like a tree without roots. It may grow tall quickly, but it will fall in the first strong wind. True strength comes from being connected, to your people, to your community, to your purpose." The room fell silent, absorbing her words. Alexander took the handkerchief, holding it up to the light. "This is our new blueprint. Every department, every project, every decision we make will be evaluated, not just for its profit potential, but for its impact on our people and our community." He outlined the specific changes: profit-sharing programs for all employees, environmental sustainability initiatives, partnerships with local educational institutions, and a complete overhaul of their corporate governance structure. "But perhaps our most important change," he said, "is in how we measure success. Starting today, Maxwell Industries will publish a quarterly impact report alongside our financial statements. This report will track our progress in areas like employee satisfaction, community engagement, and environmental stewardship." Lisa distributed folders containing the first draft of this new report format. As people flipped through the pages, excited conversations broke out across the room. This wasn't just corporate speak. These were concrete, measurable commitments to change. "There will be challenges," Alexander acknowledged. "Some investors might not understand our new direction. Our competitors might see it as weakness. But I believe, I know, that this is the path to true sustainable success." Isabella's grandmother nodded approvingly, retrieving her handkerchief. She whispered something to her granddaughter, who translated for Alexander. She says, "The threads are aligning. The pattern is becoming clear." As the meeting concluded, employees lingered, forming excited discussion groups. The energy in the room was electric. This wasn't just a corporate restructuring. It was a revolution in how business could be done. Angela approached Alexander, her eyes bright with purpose. "We've got our work cut out for us. The systems we need to build, the processes we need to change." "That's why I need you," Alexander replied. "You've always seen the bigger picture. Now help me make it reality." As they began discussing implementation details, Isabella tugged at Alexander's sleeve. "Don't forget," she said softly. "There's one more thing you need to do. The hardest thing." Alexander knew exactly what she meant. Somewhere in the city, his daughter Emma was watching the news about Maxwell Industries' transformation. It was time to rebuild that relationship too. Another kind of investment in the future, perhaps the most important one of all. The cafe where Alexander waited was small and cozy, far from the corporate world he'd been immersed in for so long. He'd chosen it carefully. This conversation needed to happen on neutral ground. His fingers drummed nervously on the table as he watched the door, waiting for Emma to arrive. They hadn't spoken properly in months, not since she'd tried to warn him about the company's problems. Like so many others, he hadn't listened to her. Either. His own daughter, who'd grown up learning the business at his knee, had seen the signs before he had. The bell above the door chimed, and there she was. Emma Maxwell had her father's determination in her jaw and her mother's grace in her movements, but her compassionate heart was entirely her own. She hesitated for a moment before approaching his table. "Hi, Dad," she said softly, sliding into the seat across from him. "Emma," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for coming." A waitress appeared with 2 cups of hot chocolate, Emma's favorite since childhood. Alexander had ordered them in advance, a small gesture that didn't go unnoticed. Emma's lips quirked in a slight smile as she wrapped, her hands around the warm mug. "I've been watching the news," she began. "It's quite a transformation you're planning." Alexander nodded. "I should have listened to you months ago. You saw what was happening, didn't you? The inconsistencies in the reports, the strange decisions." "I tried to tell you," Emma said, but there was no accusation in her voice, only sadness. "Mom, Victoria, she reached out to me, you know. Tried to get me to help her with her plan. She thought I'd want revenge for how absent you've been these past few years." The revelation hit Alexander like a physical blow. "Emma, I'm so sorry. For everything. For not being there. For not listening. For putting the company ahead of what really matters." "The company was always going to be your legacy," Emma replied, stirring her hot chocolate thoughtfully. "I understood that. What I never understood was why it had to be a legacy of just profit and power. The Maxwell Industries I grew up dreaming about was going to change the world for the better." Alexander reached across the table, taking his daughter's hand. "That's exactly what we're going to do now. But I need your help, Emma. You've always had a vision for what the company could be, what it should be." "The Maxwell Foundation," Emma said, her eyes lighting up with interest. "That was my idea, wasn't it? The one I proposed 2 years ago that got shut down for being not profitable enough." "Yes," Alexander admitted, "and now it's going to be a cornerstone of our new direction. Emma, I want you to run it." She sat back, surprised. "Dad, you have the heart for it," he continued. "The vision, the understanding of how business can be a force for good in the world. The foundation needs a leader who never lost sight of that truth, even when I did." Emma was quiet for a long moment, considering. "There would need to be complete autonomy, no interference from the corporate side, and I want to work closely with the Ethics and Compliance Division, make sure we're practicing what we preach." "Absolutely," Alexander agreed. "In fact, there's someone I'd like you to meet. A remarkable little girl who helped me see what you've been trying to tell me all along." As if on cue, the cafe door chimed again. Isabella entered with her mother and grandmother, their arrival feeling both surprising and somehow perfectly natural. Emma watched in amazement as the young girl approached their table, carrying yet another of her grandmother's handkerchiefs. "The threads are coming together," Isabella said by way of greeting, spreading the handkerchief on the table between father and daughter. This pattern showed 2 separate paths gradually weaving into one, surrounded by smaller threads, creating a complex but harmonious whole. Emma studied the pattern, then looked up at Isabella with wonder. "You're the one who helped my father see the truth, aren't you?" Isabella smiled. "Sometimes we all need a little help seeing what's right in front of us. Your father needed to remember what you never forgot, that the strongest businesses are built on love, not just money." As Emma and Isabella began discussing ideas for the foundation, Alexander sat back, watching the scene unfold. His daughter's eyes shone with the same passion he remembered from when she was young, before the corporate world had started to dim that light. Now, finally, he was giving her the chance to rekindle it, not just for herself, but for the entire company. The grandmother caught his eye and nodded approvingly. She didn't need to speak. Her handkerchief told the story. The separate threads of family and business, of profit and purpose, of past and future, were finally beginning to weave together into something stronger and more beautiful than either could be alone. 3 months after the dramatic transformation of Maxwell Industries began, the company's headquarters buzzed with a different kind of energy. The stark corporate atmosphere had given way to something more vibrant. Walls now displayed local artists' work. Meeting rooms had been renamed after inspirational figures, and the once imposing lobby hosted a weekly farmers market for employees and the community. Emma's Maxwell Foundation occupied the entire 15th floor, its spaces designed to foster collaboration and creativity. On this particular morning, she sat in a sunlit conference room with Isabella, Angela, and a group of young entrepreneurs from underprivileged backgrounds reviewing their proposals for sustainable business initiatives. Your idea for urban farming: technologies could revolutionize food security in inner-city areas, Emma said to a young woman whose hands trembled slightly as she collected her presentation materials. We'd like to offer you full funding and mentorship through our incubator program. The entrepreneur's eyes filled with tears of joy. Thank you, Ms. Maxwell. This opportunity means everything to us. As the meeting concluded, Isabella approached the window, her reflection overlapping with the city skyline beyond. The ripples are spreading, she said, her voice carrying that familiar ancient wisdom. Every life we touch creates new patterns, new possibilities. Emma joined her at the window. I never thought the foundation would make such an impact so quickly. We've funded 30 projects in 3 months, created partnerships with local schools, launched mentorship programs. Because you're not just giving money, Isabella replied. You're giving people hope, purpose. The same things your father rediscovered. Their conversation was interrupted by Angela, who entered with a tablet displaying the latest financial reports. The quarterly numbers are in, she announced, her face bright with excitement. Despite all the skeptics who said our new direction would sink the company, profits are up 15%. But more importantly, look at our impact metrics. The tablet showed impressive statistics. Employee satisfaction had skyrocketed, community engagement was at an all-time high, and their new environmental initiatives had already reduced the company's carbon footprint by 20%. The board meeting is in an hour, Angela continued. Alexander wants both of you there. There's something big happening. In the boardroom, Alexander stood before a gathering that would have been unthinkable just months ago. Alongside the traditional board members sat community leaders, environmental experts, and even a group of high school students who had won the Foundation's first Innovation Challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, Alexander began, what we've achieved in 3 months has exceeded all expectations. But today we're not here to rest on our laurels. We're here to take the next step. He gestured to Richard Harrison, who had become an unlikely ally in the wake of Victoria's downfall. Richard and I have been discussing a merger, but not the kind that Wall Street usually celebrates. We're creating something entirely new, the first major corporation structured explicitly as a benefit company, with social and environmental impact built into its very charter. The room erupted in excited murmurs. Richard stood to explain further. Our companies won't just merge, they'll transform. Every division will have sustainability and social impact goals alongside financial targets. Every project will be evaluated for its community benefit as well as its profit potential. But the most exciting part, Alexander continued, is our leadership structure. Emma Maxwell and her foundation team will have seats on the executive board with real power to influence corporate strategy. Angela Martinez will head a newly expanded ethics and compliance division with unprecedented autonomy. Isabella's grandmother, who had become a regular presence at important company meetings, pulled out a new handkerchief. This one showed an intricate pattern of circles within circles, all connected by golden threads that formed a larger, harmonious whole. The pattern is complete, Isabella translated as her grandmother spoke. What was broken has been remade into something stronger. The old way of business dies today, but something better takes its place. Alexander smiled at the wisdom in her words. Which brings me to our final announcement. In recognition of the extraordinary insight that helped save and transform this company, we're establishing the Isabella Martinez Scholarship for Visionary Leadership. Each year it will fund the education and mentorship of young people who show that same ability to see beyond the surface, to imagine better possibilities. Isabella's eyes widened in surprise. For once she hadn't foreseen this development. Her mother squeezed her hand proudly as Alexander continued to outline the scholarship's details. As the meeting progressed, Emma noticed a subtle change in the room's atmosphere. The usual corporate tension was gone, replaced by something warmer, more human. People weren't just discussing business strategies. They were sharing stories, connecting, building something that felt more like a community than a company. Later that afternoon, Emma found her father standing in his office, looking out at the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of possibility. "Did you ever imagine this is where we'd end up?" she asked, joining him at the window. Alexander shook his head, smiling. "Not in my wildest dreams. But then again, sometimes the best futures are the ones we couldn't imagine. They have to be shown to us by someone with clearer vision." As if summoned by his words, Isabella appeared in the doorway, holding yet another of her grandmother's handkerchiefs. This one showed a pattern they hadn't seen before, a sunrise breaking through clouds, its rays touching every corner of the design. "The story isn't over," she said softly. "It's just beginning." The announcement of the Maxwell-Harrison merger sent shockwaves through the business world. Financial analysts scrambled to understand this new model of corporate structure, while business schools rushed to update their curricula. The story of a company choosing purpose over pure profit and succeeding beyond all expectations was capturing imaginations worldwide. In the midst of this whirlwind, Isabella sat in her special corner of the Maxwell Foundation's office, surrounded by her grandmother's handkerchiefs. Each one told part of the story: the corruption, the discovery, the transformation, and now the future unfolding before them. "You knew all along, didn't you?" Emma asked, settling into a chair beside her. "Not just about the problems, but about how it could all change for the better." Isabella traced the patterns on her newest handkerchief, this one showing a garden in full bloom with butterflies and birds carrying seeds to new grounds. "I saw possibilities," she replied carefully. "But possibilities only become real when people choose to believe in them." Their conversation was interrupted by Alexander's arrival. He carried a thick folder and wore an expression of barely contained excitement. "The final paperwork just came through," he announced. "The merger is official, but that's not the biggest news." He opened the folder to reveal documents bearing the United Nations logo. "The UN wants to use our corporate structure as a model for sustainable business practices worldwide. They're launching a global initiative, and they want us to lead it." Emma leapt up to hug her father while Isabella smiled knowingly. "The seeds are spreading," she murmured. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. The Maxwell-Harrison headquarters became a hub of innovation and collaboration. The foundation's success stories multiplied. A young engineer's solar power project, bringing electricity to remote communities. A group of inner-city teens developing an app for community resource sharing. A former factory worker's innovative recycling program creating jobs while cleaning the environment. Richard Harrison, once their fiercest competitor, proved to be an invaluable partner in this new venture. His international connections helped spread the model globally, while his technical expertise complemented Alexander's visionary leadership. One morning, as autumn painted the city in golden hues, Isabella arrived at the office with her grandmother to find an unusual scene. The entire staff had gathered in the main atrium, where a large object stood covered by a cloth. Alexander stepped forward to address the crowd. "When we began this journey, many thought we were naive idealists who would fail within months. Instead, we've proven that business can be a force for positive change without sacrificing success. Today, we unveil something to remind us of how this transformation began." He pulled away the cloth to reveal an art installation, a massive tapestry recreating the patterns from Isabella's grandmother's handkerchiefs, woven with golden threads that caught the light. At its center was an image of a young girl standing at a crossroads, pointing toward a brighter path. Isabella's grandmother approached the tapestry, tears in her eyes. In her native language, she spoke of traditions passed down through generations, of ancient wisdom meeting modern challenges, of the power of seeing beyond the surface to the connections that bind all things. "She says," Isabella translated, "that the greatest magic isn't in seeing the future. It's in helping others see the possibility of change." As the crowd dispersed, Emma and Alexander stood with the Martinez family admiring the tapestry. "It's beautiful," Emma said, "but something's missing." She pointed to a blank space at the bottom of the design. Isabella's grandmother smiled, pulling out her latest handkerchief. This one showed an open road stretching toward the horizon, with countless paths branching off like golden threads, each leading to new possibilities. The story continues. Isabella explained. Each person who sees this will add their own thread to the pattern. Alexander nodded thoughtfully. That's the real legacy we're building, isn't it? Not just a successful company, but a new way of thinking about success itself. As they stood, there watching the sunlight play across the golden threads, each person felt the weight of the moment. They had not just saved a company, they had started a movement. The transformation of Maxwell Industries was becoming a beacon of hope, showing that even in the world of big business, there was room for wisdom, compassion, and magic. "Remember," Isabella said softly, her words carrying to all who were present. "Every end is just a new beginning. The threads of possibility are endless as long as we have the courage to follow them." Above them, the tapestry seemed to shimmer with promise, its golden threads catching the light like stars guiding the way forward. The story of Maxwell Industries would continue to evolve, but its heart, the belief in the power of purpose over profit, would remain unchanged, a testament to the wisdom of a child who saw beyond the surface to the truth that could change everything. 1 year after the merger that had transformed the corporate landscape, Alexander sat in his office reviewing the latest global impact report when an unexpected visitor arrived. Victoria's lawyer stood in his doorway, looking uncomfortable. In his expensive suit, "Mr. Maxwell, I apologize for the interruption, but there's something you need to see." He placed a sealed envelope on Alexander's desk. This was part of a contingency protocol Ms. Harrison established years ago. In the event of her legal difficulties, certain documents were to be released. Alexander opened the envelope carefully, his heart racing as he read its contents. Inside was a letter, written in Victoria's elegant hand, dated from the early days of their marriage. It revealed a side of his ex-wife he had never known, her initial dreams for Maxwell Industries, her vision of a company that could change the world for the better, and the moment she lost faith in that possibility. She wanted to create something meaningful, the lawyer explained, but somewhere, along the way, she convinced herself that power was the only path to change. The irony is, you're now building exactly what she once dreamed of. As the lawyer left, Isabella appeared in the doorway, as she often did at pivotal moments. "The past has lessons for us," she said, studying Alexander's troubled expression. "Even from those who lost their way." Emma joined them, carrying her tablet with the latest foundation reports. She paused when she saw the letter on her father's desk. "Is that from—" Alexander nodded, handing her the letter. As Emma read, her expression shifted from suspicion to surprise, then to something like understanding. She had the same dreams. "I did once," she said softly. "Which is why," Isabella interjected, pulling out one of her grandmother's handkerchiefs, "we need to invite her to the Global Impact Summit." Both Maxwells turned to her in shock. "Isabella, after everything she did," Alexander began. "Sometimes," the young girl said, spreading the handkerchief on the desk, "the best way to heal old wounds is to show what could have been. Look at the pattern." The handkerchief showed a complex design of broken circles being reformed, with golden threads weaving through the fragments to create something new and whole. At its center was a clear space waiting to be filled. "The summit will showcase everything Maxwell Harrison has achieved," Emma mused, beginning to understand. "All the lives we've changed, the communities we've helped, the innovations we've sparked. Everything she once dreamed of," Alexander finished. "But how can we trust her?" Isabella smiled mysteriously. "Trust isn't about the past, it's about the future we choose to create." After much discussion, they decided to send the invitation. The Global Impact Summit would bring together business leaders, innovators, and change-makers from around the world to learn from the Maxwell Harrison model of conscious capitalism. Victoria's presence would be a powerful symbol of transformation, if she chose to accept. The response came a week later, not through her lawyers, but in person. Victoria arrived at the Maxwell Foundation offices on a quiet afternoon, looking different from the powerful corporate warrior they remembered. She seemed smaller somehow, more human. "I won't cause trouble," she said quietly to Alexander and Emma. I need to see it, to understand how you accomplished what I thought was impossible." Isabella, who had been watching from her corner, approached Victoria with one of her grandmother's handkerchiefs. "Sometimes we need to see our old dreams through new eyes," she said, offering the delicate fabric. Victoria's hands trembled as she accepted the handkerchief. The pattern showed a phoenix rising from ashes, but unlike traditional depictions, this one was helping others rise with it. "Your grandmother's work?" she asked Isabella, running her fingers over the intricate embroidery. "She sees the truth in people," Isabella replied, "even when they've forgotten it themselves." The weeks leading up to the summit were intense. The Maxwell Foundation team worked tirelessly to prepare presentations showcasing their successful projects. Angela's Ethics and Compliance Division developed guidelines for implementing similar oversight structures in other companies. Richard Harrison coordinated with international partners to create implementation frameworks for different markets and cultures. Throughout it all, Victoria watched and listened, taking everything in with an expression that mixed regret with growing wonder. She spent hours in the Foundation's project rooms, reading about the lives that had been changed, the communities transformed, the innovations sparked. One evening, Alexander found her standing before the grand tapestry in the atrium, tears streaming down her face. "We could have built this together," she whispered as he approached. "All those years ago when we first started, this was what I wanted. How did I lose sight of it?" "The past is a teacher, not a prison," Isabella's voice came from behind them. She held out another handkerchief, this one showing a bridge being built between two distant shores. "There's still time to be part of the story." As the summit approached, Victoria began sharing insights from her years in international business, pointing out potential obstacles and suggesting solutions. Her experience, once used for personal gain, became a valuable tool for implementing positive change on a global scale. Emma, watching her mother's transformation, felt her own heart beginning to heal. "Maybe this is the real magic," she said to Isabella one day. "Not just changing companies, but changing hearts." Isabella nodded, her wise eyes twinkling. The biggest changes often start with the smallest choices. Every thread in the pattern matters. The day before the summit was to begin, Alexander called a special meeting. As his team gathered in the conference room, including Victoria in her new advisory role, he couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. But Isabella's knowing smile suggested that the most remarkable changes were still to come. The Global Impact Summit opened on a bright spring morning, with delegates from 30 countries filling the newly renovated Maxwell Harrison Conference Center. The building itself told the story of their transformation. Solar panels gleamed on the roof, a community garden flourished in what had once been an executive parking lot, and the walls displayed art from local schools and community programs. Isabella and her grandmother had arrived early, setting up a special exhibition of their handkerchiefs in the main hall. Each piece told part of the story, from the first warnings of corruption to the vision of a new kind of corporate future. Visitors paused before them, drawn in by the intricate patterns and the golden threads that seemed to glow with their own light. "Every pattern tells a story," Isabella explained to a group of fascinated business leaders, "but the most important patterns are the ones we create together." Alexander opened the summit with a speech that would have been unimaginable a year ago. "We're here today not just to talk about profit and loss, but about purpose and legacy, about how business can be a force for positive change without sacrificing success. And we're here to learn from each other, because no one has all the answers, but together we can find better questions." Emma followed with a presentation about the Maxwell Foundation's achievements, sustainable energy projects in underserved communities, educational initiatives that had already produced promising young entrepreneurs, environmental programs that were showing measurable impact. But it was the personal stories that captured everyone's attention, the lives that had been changed, the communities that had been transformed. Victoria sat in the front row, watching it all with an expression of deep reflection. When it was her turn to speak, she surprised everyone by deviating from her prepared remarks. "A year ago I was in prison," she began, her voice steady despite the murmurs that rippled through the audience. "Not a physical prison, but one of my own making. A prison built of greed, ambition, and lost dreams. I had forgotten what I once knew, that true success isn't measured in dollars but in lives touched and possibilities created. She turned to face Isabella and her grandmother. It took the wisdom of a child and the art of her grandmother to remind me of what business could be, should be. These handkerchiefs aren't just beautiful crafts. They're maps showing us the way to a better future. As the day progressed, something remarkable began to happen. Business leaders who had come skeptical of the Maxwell model found themselves drawn into deep discussions about purpose and impact. Financial analysts who had predicted doom for the conscious capitalism approach were confronted with undeniable success stories. During a break, Alexander found himself standing with Emma, Victoria, and Isabella before the grand tapestry in the atrium. "It's changing," Emma noticed, pointing to the previously blank space at the bottom. Isabella's grandmother approached, carrying her latest handkerchief. This one showed a pattern of circles expanding outward, like ripples in a pond, each touching and influencing others in an endless cascade of positive change. "The story grows," Isabella translated as her grandmother spoke. "Each person here today will carry a thread of it back to their own communities, their own businesses. The pattern never ends. It just keeps growing, changing, touching more lives." Victoria reached out tentatively to touch the handkerchief. "Can old threads be rewoven?" she asked softly. Isabella's grandmother took Victoria's hand in her weathered ones, nodding as she spoke in her native tongue. Isabella translated, "She says every thread has its purpose, even the broken ones. They remind us where we've been and help us choose where we're going." The afternoon sessions focused on practical implementation, how other companies could adopt and adapt the Maxwell-Harrison model to their own contexts. Angela Martinez led a masterclass on ethical oversight systems, while Richard Harrison shared insights on managing the transition from traditional corporate structures. But perhaps the most powerful moments happened in the small conversations. Between sessions, business leaders sharing their own dreams of positive impact, young entrepreneurs finding mentors and supporters, competitors discovering opportunities for collaboration rather than conflict. As the sun set on the first day of the summit, Alexander gathered his unlikely family, Emma, Victoria, Isabella and her family, Richard Harrison, Angela Martinez, and all the others who had become part of their story, for a quiet dinner away from the crowds. "Look at us," Emma marveled, gesturing around the table. "A year ago, who would have believed this was possible?" "The best transformations," Isabella said wisely, "are the ones that surprise even those who dreamed them." Her grandmother pulled out one final handkerchief for the day. This pattern was different from all the others. It showed not just golden threads, but spaces waiting to be filled, paths yet to be chosen, stories yet to be told. "Tomorrow's patterns," Isabella explained, "are made from today's choices." As they sat together, sharing stories and dreams for the future, Alexander realized that they had created something far more valuable than a successful business model. They had created a new way of seeing possibility in the world, and that was a gift that would keep growing, touching lives far beyond anything they could imagine. The second day of the Global Impact Summit brought an unexpected challenge that would test the very foundations of the Maxwell-Harrison transformation. As delegates gathered for the morning sessions, news broke that several major investment firms were questioning the sustainability of the conscious capitalism model. The stock market responded with immediate volatility, and whispers of doubt began circulating through the conference halls. "History repeats itself until we learn its lessons," Isabella said calmly, watching the concerned faces around her. She and her grandmother were arranging a new set of handkerchiefs for the day's exhibition, these ones showing patterns of storms giving way to clear skies. Alexander stood at the podium, facing a room now filled with uncertainty. The previous day's enthusiasm had been replaced by skepticism, particularly from traditional investors who saw the market reaction as validation of their doubts. But before he could speak, Emma stepped forward. "Let me handle this, Dad," she whispered, her eyes shining with determination. Emma took the stage with quiet confidence, pulling up not just financial charts but impact metrics that told a deeper story. "You're looking at stock prices that fluctuate by the minute," she began. but we're building something that will last for generations." She gestured to a group of young entrepreneurs seated in the front row, graduates of the Maxwell Foundation's first incubator program. These innovators have created sustainable businesses that have already employed hundreds of people in underserved communities. Their solar power initiatives have brought electricity to villages that never had it before. Their educational programs have opened doors for children who had none. One by one, the entrepreneurs stood to share their stories. A young woman from an inner-city neighborhood described how her urban farming project had transformed food deserts into community gardens. A former factory worker explained how his recycling innovation was cleaning up industrial waste while creating green jobs. Victoria, watching from the sidelines, felt moved to action. She approached the podium, asking Emma's permission to speak. The room fell silent. Everyone knew her story of redemption. "I spent years chasing the wrong kind of power," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I thought success meant winning at all costs, but look at these young leaders. Look at what they've achieved by focusing on purpose instead of just profit. They're not just making money, they're making a difference." Isabella's grandmother chose that moment to unveil her latest creation, a handkerchief that seemed to capture the very essence of their challenge. The pattern showed a tree growing through concrete, its roots spreading deep and wide, golden threads weaving through every branch and leaf. "Sometimes the strongest growth," Isabella translated as her grandmother spoke, "comes from the hardest ground." The mood in the room began to shift as more success stories emerged. Richard Harrison presented data showing how their ethical business practices had actually improved long-term profitability by building trust and loyalty among customers and employees alike. Angela Martinez demonstrated how their transparency initiatives had attracted a new generation of investors who valued sustainable growth over quick profits. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when Isabella herself addressed the gathering. Despite her young age, her presence commanded attention as she moved through the crowd, showing her grandmother's handkerchiefs to illustrate each point. "These patterns aren't just beautiful designs," she explained. "They're maps of possibility. Each thread shows a connection between people, between problems and solutions, between profit and purpose. When we follow these connections, we find ways to succeed that lift everyone up, not just a few." Alexander watched in amazement as his daughter and the young girl who had saved his company worked together to transform doubt into determination. The delegates who had arrived skeptical began engaging in earnest discussions about implementing similar models in their own organizations. During the lunch break, a group of international investors approached Alexander with an unexpected proposal. They wanted to create a global fund specifically focused on supporting companies transitioning to the Maxwell-Harrison model of conscious capitalism. "We've been watching your results closely," their spokesperson explained. "The market may fluctuate day by day, but your long-term impact metrics are unprecedented. We want to be part of scaling this model worldwide." Emma and Victoria worked together to draft the initial framework for the fund. Their past antagonism transformed into productive collaboration. As they worked, Isabella's grandmother embroidered a new handkerchief, its pattern showing golden threads extending beyond the fabric's edges, a symbol of infinite possibility. By late afternoon, the crisis had transformed into opportunity. The stock market had stabilized as more investors recognized the value of sustainable, purpose-driven business practices. But more importantly, the delegates had moved beyond defensive responses to proactive planning. "Every challenge is a chance to prove what we believe," Emma told the closing session. "Today we showed that conscious capitalism isn't just an idealistic dream, it's a practical path to sustainable success." As the day drew to a close, Alexander found Isabella standing before the grand tapestry in the atrium. The blank space at its bottom was gradually filling with new patterns, as if the story was writing itself. "Your grandmother knew this would happen, didn't she?" he asked. "The challenge, the doubt, the transformation." Isabella smiled her wise smile. "She says the strongest beliefs are those that have been tested. Now people don't just hope this model can work, They know it can. The evening ended with an impromptu gathering in the Foundation's community garden. Under the stars, surrounded by the fruits of their sustainable vision, the unlikely family that had formed through crisis and transformation shared their dreams for the future. No one noticed Isabella's grandmother quietly embroidering yet another handkerchief, this one showing a pattern that seemed to glow with its own inner light, a preview of the remarkable days still to come. The final day of the global impact. Some had dawned with a sense of possibility that even the most hardened skeptics couldn't ignore. The morning newspapers carried headlines about the Maxwell revolution in business practices, with financial analysts scrambling to create new metrics for measuring corporate success that went beyond mere profit margins. Isabella arrived early, with her grandmother, carrying a mysterious package wrapped in silk. They made their way to the conference center's main hall, where delegates were already gathering for the day's sessions. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Everyone knew that today would set the course for the future of conscious capitalism. "Today we don't just share ideas," Isabella announced as she helped her grandmother unwrap the package. "Today we weave new patterns together." Inside the package was something extraordinary, a large piece of blank fabric, embroidery hoops, and dozens of spools of golden thread. Isabella's grandmother began setting up the materials at a central table, her weathered hands moving with practiced grace. Alexander approached, curious. "What's this about?" "Every person here has a thread to add to the story," Isabella explained. "Grandmother says the future is something we create together." As delegates arrived, each was invited to add a stitch to the fabric under the guidance of Isabella's grandmother. Business leaders who had never held a needle found themselves carefully adding golden threads to an emerging pattern. Young entrepreneurs wove their dreams into the fabric, alongside seasoned executives. Emma and Victoria worked side by side, their threads creating a complex pattern that spoke of redemption and renewal. Angela Martinez added stitches that represented transparency and trust, while Richard Harrison contributed elements that showed the strength of collaboration over competition. Throughout the day, as sessions continued in other parts of the building, people would return to the central hall to add more to the communal embroidery. The pattern that emerged was unlike anything Isabella's grandmother had ever created, a magnificent tapestry of interconnected possibilities. During the afternoon keynote session, Alexander took the stage with Emma, Victoria, and Isabella. "What we've built here isn't just a new business model," he began. "It's a new way of seeing our role in the world. Every decision we make creates ripples that touch countless lives. The question is, what kind of ripples do we want to create?" Emma stepped forward, presenting the latest data from the Maxwell Foundation. "In 1 year, our initiatives have helped launch over 100 sustainable businesses, provided educational opportunities for thousands of students, and reduced environmental impact across our entire supply chain. But the numbers only tell part of the story." She gestured to the screens behind her, where images began to play. Community gardens flourishing in former food deserts, solar panels bringing light to remote villages, young entrepreneurs mentoring the next generation of changemakers. Victoria spoke next, her voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. "I stand before you as living proof that transformation is possible, not just for individuals, but for entire systems. The old way of doing business isn't just unsustainable, it's unnecessary. We've proven there's a better path." As the day progressed, commitments began pouring in from organizations around the world. Companies pledged to adopt the Maxwell-Harrison model, investors promised to prioritize conscious capitalism, and educational institutions announced new programs focused on sustainable business practices. In the late afternoon, Isabella's grandmother called everyone to gather around the completed community embroidery. The pattern was breathtaking, a complex web of golden threads showing countless paths all leading toward a brighter future. But the most remarkable thing was the space still left empty at the edges. "The pattern is alive," Isabella translated as her grandmother spoke. "It will keep growing as more people add their threads, their dreams, their possibilities." Alexander studied the pattern closely, noticing how every stitch added by the delegates had somehow been incorporated into a larger, harmonious whole. Just like our business model, he mused. Every individual success contributes to the greater good. As the summit drew to a close, participants gathered for one final ceremony. The community embroidery was carefully mounted beside the original tapestry in the atrium, the two pieces seeming to speak to each other across space and time. One, telling the story of where they had been, the other showing the infinite possibilities of where they could go. Emma stood with her father, watching as people said their goodbyes, exchanged contacts, and made plans for future collaboration. Here's really just the beginning, isn't it? She asked. Isabella appeared beside them, her wise eyes twinkling. Every ending is a new beginning, she said. The threads never really end. They just become part of a larger pattern. As the sun set on the final day of the summit, casting golden light through the atrium windows, Alexander looked at the unlikely family gathered around him. His daughter, his ex-wife, the little girl who had changed everything, and all the others who had become part of their story. Each of them had contributed their own thread to the pattern, creating something far more beautiful than any of them could have achieved alone. The future stretched before them like an empty canvas, waiting to be filled with new patterns of possibility. And somewhere in the city, Isabella's grandmother was already beginning to embroider the next chapter of their continuing story. 6 months after the Global Impact Summit, the Maxwell Harrison headquarters buzzed with a different kind of excitement. The company was preparing for its most ambitious initiative yet, the launch of the Global Innovation Academy, a revolutionary educational institution that would combine business education with social impact and ethical leadership. Isabella, now a regular presence in the building's planning sessions despite her young age, sat in the main conference room with Emma and Alexander, surrounded by architectural plans and curriculum proposals. Her grandmother's latest handkerchief lay spread before them, showing a pattern of interconnected buildings and pathways, each thread leading to new possibilities. The academy needs to be more than just a school, Isabella said, tracing the golden threads with her finger. It should be a place where dreams learn to fly. Emma nodded, pulling up the latest designs on her tablet. That's why we're building it as a living laboratory. Solar-powered facilities, urban farming installations, innovation workshops. Every aspect of the campus will demonstrate sustainable practices in action. Alexander studied the plans with pride. The academy would occupy a former industrial site that had been abandoned for years. Through intensive remediation and innovative green technology, they were transforming it into a beacon of sustainable development. Victoria's international connections have been invaluable, he admitted, still amazed by how completely his ex-wife had embraced their new mission. She's already secured partnerships with sustainable businesses across 3 continents. As if summoned by his words, Victoria entered the room, followed by Angela Martinez and Richard Harrison. The first round of student applications just came in, she announced, her eyes bright with excitement. Over 5,000 candidates from 70 countries. And these aren't just any applications, Angela added, spreading out some of the more notable submissions. These young people are already making changes in their communities. We have environmental activists, social entrepreneurs, community organizers. Richard picked up one particular file. This young woman from a rural village developed a water purification system using local materials. She's already implemented it in 3 neighboring communities. That's exactly who we want, Emma said firmly. People who don't just see problems, but create solutions. Isabella's grandmother, who had been quietly embroidering in the corner, held up her work for them to see. The pattern showed a tree with roots spreading far beyond its branches, golden threads connecting it to smaller saplings, growing in its shade. She says, Isabella translated, that true wisdom grows by sharing itself. The meeting continued into the evening as they finalized plans for the Academy's inaugural class. Every detail was carefully considered, from the selection criteria to the scholarship programs that would ensure accessibility for promising students regardless of their financial circumstances. Later that night, Alexander found himself standing in what would become the Academy's central courtyard. Construction crews had already begun transforming the space, and the basic structure of the main building was taking shape against the starlit sky. Emma joined him, wrapping her arms around herself in the cool evening air. "Remember when I was little, and I used to ask you to tell me stories about building Maxwell Industries?" Alexander smiled at the memory. "You always wanted to know what it felt like to create something from nothing." "Now I know," she said softly, "but this is better than anything we could have imagined back then. We're not just building a business anymore, we're building a future." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Isabella and her family, along with Victoria, Richard, and Angela. They had all gathered for an impromptu celebration. Tomorrow would mark the official groundbreaking ceremony for the Academy. Isabella's grandmother spread a new handkerchief on a makeshift table, its pattern glowing softly in the construction. Lights. This one showed a sunrise breaking over a landscape of possibilities, schools, businesses, communities, all connected by shimmering golden threads. "The pattern is growing," Isabella explained, her voice carrying the ancient wisdom that had become so familiar to them all. "Each person who learns here will carry a thread of it back to their own world, starting new patterns of their own." Victoria stepped forward, surprising everyone by pulling out her own attempt at embroidery, a small, somewhat uneven pattern that nevertheless showed genuine effort. "Isabella's grandmother has been teaching me," she explained with a slight blush. "She says creating beauty with our own hands helps us understand how to create beauty in the world." The group gathered around the handkerchiefs, each sharing their hopes for the Academy and its future impact. Richard spoke of technology centers that would develop sustainable solutions for global challenges. Angela described ethics workshops that would help future leaders navigate complex moral decisions. Emma outlined programs that would incubate new social enterprises. As they talked, Isabella's grandmother continued embroidering, her skilled hands adding new elements to the pattern. Small figures representing students, teachers, innovators, and dreamers, all connected by the ever-present golden threads. "Look," Isabella pointed suddenly. In the distance, the first rays of dawn were beginning to paint the sky. "Grandmother says new days bring new patterns." Alexander looked around at his unlikely family, his daughter, his ex-wife, his former competitor, the little girl who had changed everything, and all the others who had become part of their story. Each of them had contributed to weaving this new pattern of possibility. "The Academy isn't just our legacy," he realized aloud. "It's a beginning." Emma squeezed his hand. "A beginning of what?" Isabella smiled her wise smile. "Of everything. That's possible when we dare to dream in gold." The groundbreaking ceremony for the Global Innovation Academy drew crowds from around the world. The once abandoned industrial site had been transformed into a canvas of possibility, with sustainable architecture models and urban garden demonstrations showing glimpses of what was to come. Isabella stood on the makeshift stage with her grandmother, watching as Alexander prepared to address the gathering. The morning sun caught the golden threads in the massive tapestry they had created for the occasion, a stunning piece that combined elements from all their previous patterns into a vision of the future. "1 year ago," Alexander began, his voice carrying across the attentive crowd, "a little girl walked into my office and showed me a different way of seeing the world. Today, we're not just breaking ground for a new building, we're breaking ground for a new way of thinking about business, education, and our role in shaping the future." Emma stepped forward to present the Academy's mission. "Our goal is simple but ambitious, to nurture the next generation of leaders who understand that true success comes from creating value for everyone, not just shareholders. Every student who passes through these gates will learn not just how to build profitable businesses, but how to build a better world." Victoria, standing beside Richard Harrison, added her own perspective. "This academy represents something I lost sight of long ago, the understanding that power isn't about control, it's about empowerment. Each student here will learn to use their talents and resources to lift others up, not push them down." The ceremony continued with presentations from future faculty members and partners. Angela Martinez outlined the ethics curriculum she had developed, while Richard demonstrated the sustainable technologies that would be integrated into every aspect of campus life. But the most moving moment came when Isabella's grandmother took the stage. Though she spoke in her native language, her actions transcended words as she began to embroider a new pattern directly onto the ceremonial ribbon that would be cut to open the academy. Isabella translated as her grandmother worked. She says that every stitch we make becomes part of the future we create. The academy isn't just a school, it's a loom where new patterns will be woven, new possibilities discovered, new dreams given wings. As the morning progressed, delegates from around the world shared their own commitments to supporting the academy's mission. Companies pledged internships for students, governments offered partnerships for implementing sustainable solutions, and communities requested help in developing their own innovation centers. During a quiet moment between presentations, Alexander found himself standing with Emma, Victoria, and Isabella near the site where the Academy's central garden would be planted. "It's amazing how much has changed in just 1 year," Emma mused, looking around at the transformation taking place. Victoria nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest beginnings. Who would have thought that a child's wisdom and a grandmother's handkerchiefs could spark a global revolution in business thinking?" Isabella smiled her knowing smile. "The patterns were always there," she said. "We just needed to learn how to see them." As the ceremony drew to a close, Isabella's grandmother unveiled one final handkerchief. This one was different from all the others. Instead of a completed pattern, it showed only the beginning of several golden threads extending toward empty space. "This one is unfinished," Isabella explained, "because the story isn't over. Each person who comes here will add their own thread to the pattern, creating something more beautiful than any of us could imagine alone." Alexander looked out at the gathered crowd, business leaders, educators, students, community members, all united by a shared vision of what was possible. The sun caught the golden threads in the ceremonial tapestry, sending sparkles of light dancing across the gathering, like promises of things to come. Emma squeezed her father's hand. "We did it, Dad. We really did it." "No," he corrected gently, "we're doing it. This is just the beginning." Isabella's grandmother nodded approvingly as she carefully folded her unfinished handkerchief. The empty spaces in its pattern seemed to glow with possibility, waiting for new threads to be added, new stories to be told, new dreams to be woven into reality. As the ceremonial ribbon was cut, marked with the grandmother's golden embroidery, a gentle breeze carried the sounds of celebration across the site. It whispered through the demonstration gardens, rustled the plans for future buildings, and seemed to make the golden threads in all the handkerchiefs dance with joy. The Global Innovation Academy was more than just a school. It was a promise to the future, a declaration that business could be both profitable and purposeful, that success could be measured in lives changed as well as profits earned, that the smallest thread of wisdom could weave a tapestry of transformation that would touch generations to come. And somewhere in the city, a new handkerchief was waiting to be embroidered, its blank fabric ready to receive the patterns of possibility that were yet to come. 2 years had passed since the little girl with ancient wisdom in her eyes first walked into Alexander Maxwell's office. The Global Innovation Academy was now a thriving reality, its sustainable campus a beacon of hope and possibility. On this particular morning, Alexander stood in his office watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold, reminiscent of the threads that had guided their transformation. Knock at his door drew his attention. Emma entered, followed by Isabella, who had grown taller but maintained that same mysterious wisdom in her dark eyes. They carried with them a special delivery, a package wrapped in familiar embroidered fabric. "Grandmother finished it last night," Isabella announced, carefully unwrapping the package to reveal what could only be described as a masterpiece of embroidery. "She says it's time." The handkerchief was larger than any they had seen before, its pattern telling the complete story of their journey, from the dark days of corporate corruption to the bright dawn of conscious capitalism. But what caught Alexander's attention was the central image, a perfect circle of golden threads connecting past, present, and future in an endless loop of possibility. "There's something else," Emma said, pulling out an envelope. The results from the Academy's first year. Alexander opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The data was extraordinary. Their first class of graduates had already launched over 50 sustainable enterprises, implemented community development, projects in 12 countries, and created innovative solutions to long-standing environmental challenges. But that's not all, Isabella added, her eyes twinkling. Show him, Emma. Emma produced another document, an analysis showing how companies that had adopted the Maxwell-Harrison model were outperforming traditional corporations not just in social impact metrics, but in long-term profitability and market stability, the EC. Pattern is complete, Isabella explained, tracing the circular design in her grandmother's embroidery. What started as a crisis has become a revolution in how business can work. The three of them made their way to the Academy campus, where a special ceremony was about to take place. The central courtyard, once an industrial wasteland, now bloomed with gardens and buzzed with the energy of young innovators from around the world. Victoria was already there, helping Isabella's grandmother set up an exhibition of all her handkerchiefs, arranged chronologically to tell their story. The transformation in Alexander's ex-wife was remarkable. Gone was the cold corporate warrior, replaced by a passionate advocate for ethical business practices. "Remember when we thought power was the only goal worth pursuing?" she asked Alexander, as he approached. "How blind we were." Richard Harrison joined them, accompanied by Angela Martinez and a group of international business leaders who had flown in for the occasion. "The Maxwell-Harrison model is being adopted faster than we can keep track," he reported. "Companies are realizing that doing good is good business." The ceremony began with a presentation by the Academy's first graduating class. One by one, young innovators shared their projects: solar-powered water purification systems, sustainable urban farming initiatives, educational technology platforms for underserved communities. Each presentation was a thread in the larger pattern they had created together. Emma took the stage to announce the launch of the next phase of their vision, a global network of innovation hubs, each adapted to local needs but connected by their shared commitment to conscious capitalism. The first 10 hubs would open in communities that had been transformed by their graduates' projects. "This is how change sustains itself," she explained to the gathered crowd. "By creating networks of possibility, by showing that another way is possible, by weaving new patterns of success that include everyone." Isabella's grandmother chose that moment to unveil her latest creation, a series of handkerchiefs that, when placed together, formed a map of the world with golden threads connecting all the places their work had touched. But unlike her previous works, these pieces had spaces left intentionally blank. "The empty spaces are for the stories yet to come," Isabella translated as her grandmother spoke, "for the patterns that others will weave as they carry this vision forward." Alexander watched as students and business leaders gathered around the display, each finding their own connection to the larger story. The Academy had become more than a school. It was a catalyst for global transformation, a living example of how business could be reimagined. Later that evening, as the celebration continued under the stars, Alexander found himself in a quiet moment with Isabella and her grandmother. The old woman was already beginning to embroider something new, her weathered hands moving with practiced grace. "What is she creating now?" he asked. Isabella smiled that wise smile that had started it all. "She says this pattern is different. It's not about the past or even the present. It's about the dreams that haven't been dreamed yet, the possibilities that are still waiting to be discovered." As they watched the grandmother work, golden threads catching the starlight, Alexander realized that their story had indeed come full circle. What had begun as one company's crisis had grown into a movement that was changing the very nature of business and success. But more than that, they had created something that would continue to grow and evolve long after they were gone. Each student who graduated from the Academy, each company that adopted their model, each community that was transformed, all were new threads in an ever-expanding pattern of possibility. The night was filled with the sound of voices sharing dreams and plans for the future, while above them, the stars twinkled like countless golden threads waiting to be woven into new patterns of possibility. On the morning of the Academy's second anniversary, Isabella stood before a new group of students, her grandmother's latest, handkerchief spread before her. Though still young, she had become a beloved teacher at the institution, sharing the wisdom that had transformed a company and sparked a global movement. "Every pattern tells a story," she began, gesturing to the intricate embroidery. "But the most important patterns are the ones we create together." The classroom was unlike any other in the world. Instead of rows of desks, students sat in collaborative circles. The walls displayed a combination of financial charts and impact metrics, while living plants and natural light created an atmosphere of growth and possibility. Alexander and Emma watched from the doorway, both moved by how far they had come. The Maxwell-Harrison model had become a case study in business schools worldwide, but here at the Academy it was more than theory. It was a living practice. "I never thought failure could lead to something so beautiful," Alexander mused, remembering the desperate days when his empire had seemed on the verge of collapse. Emma squeezed his hand. "Sometimes we need to let go of what we think success looks like to find what it really means." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Victoria and Richard, accompanied by a delegation of international business leaders. The visitors had come to see firsthand how the Academy was training the next generation of conscious capitalists. "It's remarkable," one CEO commented, watching Isabella guide her students through an exercise in ethical decision-making. "These young people aren't just learning business, they're learning wisdom." Victoria, who now headed the Academy's international outreach program, nodded in agreement. "That's the real revolution. We're not just changing how business works. We're changing how people think about success itself." As the morning progressed, the visitors were treated to presentations from current students and recent graduates. Each project demonstrated how profit and purpose could work together. A sustainable fashion brand that employed artisans from indigenous communities, a tech startup that made renewable energy accessible to rural areas, a food distribution network that eliminated waste while feeding the hungry. Angela Martinez joined them for lunch in the Academy's rooftop garden, where students grew ingredients for the campus cafe. "Every quarter, our impact metrics show the same thing," she reported. "Companies led by our graduates aren't just doing good, they're outperforming traditional businesses in every measure that matters." But perhaps the most powerful moment came when Isabella's grandmother gathered everyone in the grand hall, where all her handkerchiefs were permanently displayed. The elderly woman had been working on something special, a new kind of pattern that seemed to shift and change as people moved around it. "She says," Isabella translated, "that this is the pattern of possibility. It looks different from every angle because the future has infinite perspectives." The visitors studied the embroidery in amazement, each seeing something different in its intricate design. Some saw market opportunities, others saw social solutions, but all saw hope for a better way of doing business. As the day drew to a close, Alexander found himself back in his office at Maxwell-Harrison headquarters. The city stretched out before him, but he saw it differently now, not as a landscape of competition and conquest, but as a web of possibilities, waiting to be woven together. Emma joined him, carrying the latest impact report. "Did you ever imagine when Isabella first walked into your office that we'd end up here?" Before he could answer, Isabella herself appeared, along with her grandmother. The old woman carried what everyone knew would be her final handkerchief. She had announced that morning that her work was complete. The pattern she had created was unlike anything they had seen before. It showed not just their story, but countless others branching out from it, each thread leading to new possibilities, new patterns, new ways of weaving success and purpose together. "Grandmother says," Isabella translated, her voice soft with emotion, "that the most beautiful patterns are the ones that never end. They just keep growing, changing, inspiring others to create their own designs." Alexander looked at the people gathered in his office, his daughter, his ex-wife, his former competitor, the little girl who had changed everything, and all the others who had become part of their story. Each had contributed their own thread, to a pattern that had grown beyond anything they could have imagined. "So what happens next?" Emma asked, looking at the unfinished edges of the final handkerchief. Isabella smiled her wise smile. "That's up to all of us. The pattern never really ends. It just becomes part of something bigger." As the sun set over the city, casting golden light through the office windows, they stood together in comfortable silence, each feeling the weight and wonder of what they had created. The Maxwell Harrison story had become more than a business success. It was a beacon of possibility,